back at the Borson farm in Minnesota, but we're just going to focus on the time that they're in Norway, starting with our grand entrance to Bergen, and the trip will end with their harrowing return trip across the Atlantic as the World War I was raging throughout Europe. During this time, they kept diaries religiously. They kept them in a book similar to this. These are facsimiles that we put together for this for this event. The originals are with my cousin Paul, who is Inga's son. So I'd like for you to think of me now in the next 30 minutes or so as Ben Borson, my grandfather, when he was 37 years old. I know that's a stretch.
And for even more of a stretch, I'd like you to think of me as 15-year-old Inga, who was Bob's aunt and Ben Borson's daughter.
Now first a word about Grandpa Ben. Here you see him, we think he's around age 37 here. And this picture is also in your program. When Ben was just 15 years old, it was in 1892, he left Romsdalen, which is an area along the coast of Norway, halfway between Bergen and Trondheim approximately. He was the oldest of 10 children, and eventually almost all of his children moved to America, followed his footsteps to America. Now in Norway he was known as Bernhard Greta. Greta, well he realized that's not going to be an easy name to say in America or even to spell. So he decided he would change it. And his father was named Bor Greta, so he had his son to Bor, and voila, he became Ben Borson. And all the brothers and sisters that followed him, they also took that name. So that's where the Borson line began.
In America, Ben went on to marry a Norwegian immigrant, Anna Helland, and they created a fine home in Minnesota where Ben farmed and became a community leader. Ben and Anna saved enough money to take the whole family, the 3 children, to Norway for the first time for visits with both sides of the family. With them were the 2 sons, Albert, Bob's father, and he was 11 at the time, and Henry, who was 4, and then of course the teenage Inga. And in this picture, Inga is about 12, so this was about 3 years before this trip takes place. And this is Bob's father, Albert, who would have been her little brother. And the family story is that she was always very protective of him and not wanting anybody to get into any scrabbles with him. We begin Inga's diary with the family arrival in Bergen, Norway, after 10 days at sea. So Inga writes, "We passed Scotland about 5:30 in the morning on April 23rd. Papa saw it. He said it was all green."
Yeah, I was up early in the morning and saw Scotland and some of the islands, which looked very fine after being used to the ocean for a week or more. Everybody was in good spirits in anticipation of landing.
And then Inga writes, "About 11 p.m. we came to Bergen, and my, but it was nice to see all those lights. Several small boats came out to meet us, and they sailed around us. They played and sang many of Norway's national songs. I tell you, it was just fine. In the town, my, how strange things seemed to me, especially the streets. They were as crooked as can be, and the horses and the harnesses and the wagons, they were very funny. But there's one thing I like to look at in the daytime, and that is the mountains. They look awful nice. There's green on their sides, and once in a while you see a couple of white houses."
Yeah, we got a warm welcome at Bergen. We went around town and drank coffee and ate lefse, potato cakes, and all those nice things. We expect to leave tonight for Stavanger on a steamer called Christiana.
After Bergen, the family took a boat to Stavanger and from there to the island of Rennesøy to visit Ben's in-laws, Anna's family. Anna was born on Rennesøy in the home shown on page 3 of your program. And this would be her first trip home since immigrating to America. Now, the cover of this book, and this is a book that belongs to Bill Eklund. Where are you, Bill? Yeah. This belongs to Bill Eklund, and he was kind enough to loan it to us. But this is a view on Rennesøy looking toward Monsteroy. And Bob and I were at Anna's house, which is still in the family. It's owned by his second cousin now as a vacation home. But anyway, if you were standing on Anna's front porch where she was born, well, she wasn't born on the front porch, but if you were standing in the house on the front porch where she was born, this is the view you would have. And Bob and I have actually taken this exact picture when we've been there. But Bill's family, Bill Eklund's family, he has family originating over here on Monsteroy. And so you could really almost, I think most people could swim across this. They were that close. And they actually, Bob and Bill have decided that they probably have some really strong family connections. On the first day on Rennesøy, Inga writes, I didn't get up until late the day after we arrived in Rennesøy, for I was awful tired. Some of the family were planting potatoes and some were planting trees. I wasn't doing much of anything, only tatting some lace. In the afternoon, we went to Vigavåg, the main town on the island. We liked it all right. On another day, Inga writes, today us kids are home alone, and my, such a time we are having. We're just tearing the house upside down. We broke 2 dishes, and then we did a lot of other mischief. We went to Vigavåg when the boat came in. The ladies had been in town to buy hats.
I expect to start for Romsdalen to see my parents soon. Then I will proceed by train to Oslo, the capital, for festivities in connection with the 100th anniversary of Norway's independence. Like a lot of other Norwegian Americans, we timed our trip to Norway to correspond with that historic milestone. Now Ben then takes a boat to Romsdalen, spends a week with his family there. Then he boards a train for Oslo, which in 1914 was called Christiania. And there he attends the banquet and concert at the World's Fair and picks up invitations for dinner at the Royal Palace, an event he vividly describes in his diary. This was something so unusual for me that I felt altogether out of place. The people all appeared in evening suits, plug hats, and white gloves, except a few of us Americans who were invited. And even some of them had been foolish enough to get fitted up with evening suits for this occasion. We sat down to the tables at 7:45. I had number 2 table with 14 seats, so it was not far from where the king sat. The dinner contained 7 different courses and about that many kinds of drinks. After dessert, we drank toasts for the king and several other leading men of the land, among which were the United States Minister to Norway. I got up from the table at 11:15. Now the next day we went to take part in a parade through the streets of Oslo. We all got an American flag and got in line. The parade was so long I couldn't see the tail end of it, I being rather close to the front. We marched through the main streets of Oslo singing Norwegian and American songs, and then proceeded to the fort where the king greeted us and held a short speech. We then dispersed, and I walked slowly up Karl Johan Street, and there I saw about as many people as I've ever seen together in one place in my life. Meanwhile, back in Rennesøy.
Hooray! Today is the 17th of May, Norway's national holiday, and everybody is happy, young and old, for it's real nice this morning. Brother Henry and I went to the schoolhouse and met there with the other children and listened to a little speech by the lady teacher and got some lunch. Then we followed the parade to church, and from there all the people marched to the schoolhouse where they celebrated the 17th of May. There was music and racing of all kinds, running, walking, picking apples, threading needles, and several other things of amusement. They had some fireworks, and the young folks danced and played games. While all this is going on in Rennesøy, Ben is still in Oslo.
Yeah, at 7 o'clock on May 17th, I got ready to go to the King's Palace for supper. After showing my card, I was admitted to the palace, but just as soon as I got inside, I felt like retreating. Here again, the men were dressed in evening suits, white ties, gloves, and high plug hats. And the ladies, I can hardly describe. Their necks and busts were bare. But to make up for that, they had skirts so long they had about 6 feet dragging on the floor. I thought that very disgusting. And so did some other Americans that were present. Well, all I could do was kind of hold back and see what the other people would do. First thing was to go up and bow to 3 ladies supposed to be the highest in the land next to the Queen. Then we talked a while with until one of the ushers cried out that the King and Queen were coming. We all lined up on each side of the room and watched them march through. Then it was arranged that we Americans be allowed to go up and shake hands and bow to the King and Queen. There were probably 15 or 20 of us, so we went through that performance, after which the King went up to a platform and held a speech. He mentioned the Americans showing up with regard for their home fatherland. We responded with cheers. We then went in to partake of the supper. It was very good tasting stuff, but I cannot attempt to describe the things we partook of. Then we helped ourselves to cigars, which we smoked on a second-story veranda and watched the fireworks.
Meanwhile, back in Rennesøy, Inga writes that she and family members went to meet Ben, returning from Oslo. A few days later, Ben and his wife Anna and the 3 children depart for the boat traveling north to be with Ben's side of the family in Romsdalen.
Well, we can only imagine, I guess, what Ben might have been thinking as he returns to the place of his birth after being gone for like 22 years. But he did write a poem before leaving for Norway, which kind of in anticipation of this kind of reunion. And here is his poem. How long must I wait before I see the beauty of Romsdalen? How long before I can meet friends and acquaintances at midsummer snow? Up there among the peaks of the high mountains, my thoughts want to linger. Oh, sweet blessed memories of our farm and the surrounding area. Here I saw the snow-clad mountains which towered up towards the clouds. Here I heard the rifles boom. Here I saw the wood grouse fly. When the meadow begins to green and the forest gets its summer dress, when the bird in the nest shall be rewarded for winter's hard circumstances, then it is as if sorrow vanishes and life comes forth anew. It is first then that joy begins. Oh, if only I could go home. The sunny beach out by the sea has captured my mind in its power. The lovely fjords are created with Providence's thought of splendor. The most beautiful place here on earth is in Romsdalen's mountains and fjords. And this is a picture of Romsdalen that you also have in your program. It really is beautiful. I think it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been.
That's where my grandfather came from.
Oh yeah, right. Well, once actually in Romsdalen, Ben writes about the poignant reunion with his family. My parents had grown old, and Father's hair was gray. I can't describe the feelings I had when I stood once again at home and went through the door. Here stood my brother and sister and greeted me warmly. They'd grown up since I went on my way. Everyone wishes for a reunion, but those feelings cannot be explained. The longing, yes, the tears. My heart has a language that cannot be interpreted only with words, but is still understood by all who live there in that house.
Oh, it's so warm today, I hardly know what to do. Papa and Jacob climbed Moa Nebben today, even if it is warm. After supper, Ragna, Pauline, Signe, and I went out for a while and picked 4-leaf clovers. There are lots of flowers that grow wild around here. There's some violets and some wild pansies.
We've been invited out every other day since we came home. There's not much difference between night and day here. The only difference is that the sun doesn't shine for a few hours, but it's just as light at night as it is in the daytime. So now with that in mind, the adult members of the family head north for a 10-day trip to the Lofoten Islands, Trondheim, and some other points of interest. They leave the kids behind, but the kids don't seem to mind that a bit.
Inga writes, "We had a good time while the folks were away. Signe played the mouth organ a while one evening, and afterwards we went down to the river and sat a while. And while we were there, one of the neighbor boys fell into the river, so he had to go home to change his clothes. On June 24th, we went to a Norwegian wedding, and it was grand. It isn't like it was in America, so it's something new to me. We ate 5 times, from 12 noon till 11 p.m. There was so awful much good to eat, stuff to eat, so you can imagine how we feel, something like a stuffed chicken. The next evening, we went out and watched them burn the midsummer bonfire, which was awful nice. And they had burned it all up. After they burned it all up, we played several games. But I tell you, bed felt pretty good that night."
Now on July 2nd, Ben returns to Oslo, this time with his wife Annie, for 4th of July celebrations where Norwegian Americans were being honored in connection with our Independence Day. Among the many events that day, visiting Americans met in Oslo's Frogner Park to watch Governor Hanna of North Dakota present a statue of Abraham Lincoln, a gift from the people of North Dakota to Norway. And the American legation presented a cash donation of Norwegian Americans to the Norwegian Parliament, and the day ended with another banquet and fireworks attended by the King of Norway.
Meanwhile, back in Romsdalen, Inga writes, "Some of us went up on the mountain, up to a mountain cottage they call a seder. In the seder houses, they only have 2 rooms, one kitchen and then a room where they keep the milk from the cows that chase up to the seder. It seems funny to see such a house. It was so foggy on the mountain that I went and sat on a large stone in the middle of the river. I sang as large and as loud as I could because I was sure no one could hear me there. A person feels so free when they get so high. Olga and I were out eating berries and making hat pins nearly all the time. I cut some bark off a tree and put a stick in its place. I'm going to see if it's there the next time I come to Norway."
Now Ben skips a few weeks writing in his diary, and he resumes at the end of August 1914. He'd just gone to Ålesund on the coast with some family members, and he writes, "We saw 7 or 8 German warships on this trip. And on Sunday, July 26th, they all got orders to start for home. People are saying it could be the biggest battle the world has ever seen." During the week from July 26th to August 1st, the European War was declared. And on August 2nd, Norway too began mobilizing its army. It was a sober time when the orders came for people in Romsdalen to join the ranks. Some of my own relatives had to go, and it can perhaps be better imagined than told how the feelings ran among the people, both those that had to leave home and those that were left behind.
Inga writes, "Today we have done hardly anything but talk about war because people think war will break out any day here in Norway. I am so afraid I hardly know what to do."
Well, then there's the food question. Everyone wanted to get a supply of flour. And one day, the stores had sold out their stock, and a whole lot of people hadn't got any. The wholesale houses couldn't send any more, and it became almost a panic. The storekeepers sent telegrams one after another, but it didn't seem to avail much. They finally got promises of a few sacks of flour. Then the directors of the farmer's store held meetings and took a census of the people and the flour that some had already purchased and how many children in each family, and they tried to divide the flour in proportion to the size of the family. Everybody seemed to have a fever. The talk was nothing but food and war. It was not only here in this territory, but over the whole country. The government took charge of the food supply to be used for the army, but it finally righted itself to some extent. The coal supply, too, was short, but after the war got started and things taken their course, they got information from England that they would hold the sea open and that Norway could get some coal there, a reasonable amount, that is. The emigrant traffic was stopped for a while between Norway and England, and that scared all the Americans who were staying in this country. Everyone wanted to get home at once, and there were some pretty good sums of money offered those who had already secured their berths for the privilege of getting the other fellow's berth. But they were all turned down. A whole lot of us wrote to the American legation in Oslo and asked for assistance, and we were told that the U.S. government would take care of all of its citizens, but that it would take some time to get the wheel turning.
Inga writes, Tuesday, August 11th. Almost the first thing I saw today were 7 to 8 large torpedo boats. I will tell you there was quite an excitement here because they didn't know what nation owned them. War is the only thing to be talked about today.
Well, the North Sea is finally opened again for traffic. That is, England would again let other than its own citizens come ashore and travel through their country. I got information from the White Star Line that they could now handle tourists again, so we decided to strike while the iron was hot. We engaged berths on the SS Olympic, which is to leave with Liverpool on the 15th or 16th of September. But it wasn't only the food and coal that this war affected. The money in the banks was also held back. I had some money in the bank, and I went out to get it, but I could get only a very small amount. The law protected them in this. Then there were a lot of people that had some money in the bank and went to draw it out for no purpose at all but to sit on it. And to prevent this, they enforced the moratorium. I waited a while, then I wrote a few words and told the bank I had to leave for America and would have to have the money at a certain date, and I got through. I've had repeated requests from my wife to get ready and pull for home. Otherwise, I might have stayed for 2 or 3 weeks more. But after all, it's perhaps best to get started on the way. I see from the papers that the English coast is surrounded with contact mines in the sea, and several boats have struck those mines and gone down. I only hope we don't have such horrible luck.
Inga writes, we left Renaissance at 7:30 on Saturday, September 12th for the last time, and there were many people there to see us leave. Some followed us to Stavanger too. We were on the go all day getting ready for the trip to America, sailing from Bergen.
Now in Bergen, Ben reconnects with his wife and children and his wife's family members, and he writes, here at Bergen was another parting, but felt the most by my wife and her folks, although it is something that stirs a person's heart at saying goodbye on such occasions as these.
Inga writes, the boat left for Newcastle at 1 p.m. on Sunday. We had nice weather so far, but some are seasick.
Yeah, quite a number of the passengers got seasick, but I was thinking mostly of the contact mines. The ship's course was nearly straight west till we got within sight of Scotland, then south along the coast far enough to be clear of mines, unless there should happen to be one drifting loose. Monday night, the wind began to blow, and by midnight it was blowing quite a white gale. The ship was tossed around in great shape. A lot of the passengers got sick again, and those that weren't sick were thinking of the mines. I do not think there were very many who slept that night, but daylight found us still ship-shape, and the wind had spent its fury. Everyone felt thankful that we were soon through with our experience on the North Sea. And the next day, Ben writes, arrived at the mouth of Newcastle Bay. We had to stop and wait for a pilot to take the ship in through the fjord and past the mines. Everybody was ordered below deck so as to give nobody a chance to note the course the ship was taking and to draw maps of the inlet. We arrived at the dock safe and sound on the morning of the 15th. I forgot to mention that we saw any number of warships in the distance to the south of us. We were also hailed by a couple, but were given orders to proceed on our way.
Inga writes, we came to Newcastle at 10 a.m. and from there they took us in a wagon to the railway station. Going on the train, we saw some of England. I have never seen so many greenhouses and pretty flowers as I did there. We came to Liverpool about 6 o'clock, and from there they took us to the hotel for immigrants. My goodness, I never saw so many poor people and beggars as I did there. Such a town. It is the dirtiest town I ever saw, and the streets are just packed with bootblacks and fruit sellers. But at last we came to the hotel, and there I thought the storekeepers would pull some of us away. Nearly everyone was standing outside telling the immigrants to come to their store for anything we might want.
After supper last night, I sent 2 telegrams, one to Romsdalen and the other to Rennesøy. We got up at 5 o'clock this morning, got our breakfast and also our steamship tickets, got on the bus and rode to the dock. Now here we had a lot of red tape. Had to show our tickets and citizenship papers before we were allowed to pass on to the steamer that would take us aboard the Olympic. This took several hours, and when we finally got alongside the Olympic, we had the same performance to go through, only this time everyone was examined by the company doctor. Then we were huddled along a passageway through almost the whole length of the Olympic. And here's a photograph of the Olympic, which is also in your program. This was a sister ship of the Titanic. It was actually built a year before the Titanic. When leaving Norway, we had imagined it would be nothing but Scandinavians on board the ship on account of the other European countries being engaged in the war, but we were very badly mistaken. Although a lot of us were Scandinavians, there were a whole lot of other people, even Negroes. I don't know what nationalities are not represented here, but all the same, it's a nice bunch of people.
Inga writes, got up about 7 a.m. on our first day at sea. The waves have come over the deck quite a bit, so many are sick, but I can't see why. It seems to me it's just like being in a large hotel instead of a boat. There are all kinds of people here from all nations. There are 2 girls here that smoke cigarettes. They're from Spain. Last night, the young folks danced, and why such a dance? It is the funniest dance I ever saw.
We all took notice of how careful the ship's officers are in regard to lights showing from the ship. They shut up every porthole, and the decks are all in the dark. Just the necessary lights are on in the mast, and a small one on each side of the ship. We've been enveloped in fog all day, foghorn blowing every minute. It's still foggy as we go to bed. Have not been going at more than half speed, so of course we'll be late in arriving at port. We came very near having an accident just before dark last night owing to the fog. We met a sailing ship and didn't see it till it was right in front of us. Olympic reversed the speed at once and came to a standstill, and the sailing ship got over on the left side of us. Have not found out how many miles we came the last 24 hours, but have read some war news sent by wireless.
Inga writes, we took 2 pictures today. Several men were clad to represent Indians and cowboys, and they were up on deck. They played on some mouth organs and did tricks so as to draw the attention of the people so there wouldn't be a panic because there was a fire down in the kitchen. There were very few that found out about it, but I heard some people talking about it. I got so scared I hardly knew what to do. I was afraid the whole boat would catch fire.
Tuesday, September 22nd. This afternoon we were stopped by a warship, but it happened to be English, and it was just for a few minutes. Then we proceeded on our way. Our ship did not know what warship it was, though, and she got ready to run away. But the warship stood right down on us, and we would not have had time to get away, since it was a little foggy, so we couldn't see very far. On the last trip Olympic made, she was chased for 24 hours by a German man of war, but got away. The RMS Mauritania of the Cunard line was also chased on her last trip. Olympia is not going to carry passengers back to Europe, and I've heard that they're going to quit running for a while. We're expecting to see land in a little while now, and tomorrow our ocean journey will be through. We'll be in New York before morning. I will not attempt to describe my parting with the folks at home. It was indeed hard to say goodbye to father, mother, and sisters, perhaps for the last time. On the whole, I've never enjoyed a summer as much in all my life, and it only passed too quickly. However, I live in the hope that I will have the chance to spend another summer in Romsdalen together with my parents. It's not altogether my parents that have made my stay so full of pleasure and enjoyment, though they've done the most to that end, but all the people that I've met have been so entertaining and kind that one almost regrets leaving them, and if it wasn't for necessity, I would stay longer. But as the saying goes, self-preservation is the law of nature, and so it is with me. I have myself and family to support, and as I can't see any way to make anything in Norway, I have to go where I know I can do something.
Inga writes, got to land at 2 a.m. We got up at 5 this morning, for we had to be on deck at 5:45 to pass the doctor's examination. About 7 o'clock, we had to go through a whole lot of passengers to show our citizenship papers and tickets. When we finally got through there, we came on land and we went to a hotel and had dinner. From there, we took an elevated streetcar to the wharf, passing some of the highest buildings in New York, such as the Woolworth Building and the Singer Building. When we came to the wharf, we took a boat to Ellis Island, where all the immigrants who are not American citizens have to go through a number of questions before they are allowed to come to America. We got our railroad tickets and went past the Statue of Liberty. We left the railway station on the Baltimore and Ohio at 9 p.m. The next day we came to Buffalo, walked around town for a while, got something to eat, and left, passing Suspension Bridge and Niagara Falls and going up into Canada. In New York and Canada, you could see large fields of apple trees, potatoes, and tomatoes. I never saw so many tomatoes as I did in Canada. We took the sleeper, so we had a pretty good night's rest. On Friday, September 25, we came to Chicago about 9:30 a.m., and we met some friends, so we had good company to Minneapolis. We left Chicago about 10 a.m. and came to Minneapolis about 11 p.m. The next day, we were busy all the time. I got new shoes and a hat and a coat. On Sunday, September 27, we got off the train in Tracy, Minnesota about 4 a.m., and there we were met by Oldie Borson, Thomas Helland, and others, so there was quite a bunch that accompanied us home. Got to the farm about 6 a.m., and the first thing I did was play Home Sweet Home on the piano.
And those are actually the last words in Inga's diary. Home sweet home on the piano. And that ends our program.
Can you go through that Ellis Island thing? I was bewildered by the fact that these are returning American citizens, but they took a boat to Ellis Island where, go ahead.
I think they still have to, I assume that they still, that's in the diary, so I assume that they still had to go through Ellis Island and just show their papers. Yeah, it's immigration, it's where they were going through immigration. It's like customs.
And a comment, because I just went on the Ellis Island website, my grandparents are on it. Anytime in that whole period you went back and forth, you're on Ellis Island if you were either an American citizen returning or, and you can find the passenger, you can find the ship, a picture of the ship and everything.
Yeah, we have the manifest
Yes.
for them returning, we have a picture of it.
Could you talk about the diaries themselves and how they were written? I'm assuming they were in Norwegian.
No, that's an interesting thing.
Actually, they were not.
Yeah, no, my grandfather, when he was 15 when he left Norway, I can't imagine that he spoke much of any English. And I've asked some of my relatives, I said, how did he learn English? I mean, he was a very good writer. He wrote a lot of editorials and letters to the editor. And they said, well, he was a reader. He had a set of encyclopedias in his home. He had a lot of books of World War II. He had the complete works of William Shakespeare, which we received after he died with our family. He had How to Build Mental Power. He was a reader, so that was. So, and the funny thing too about Inga, she's 15-year-old. She's of course, American, so she's writing in English. But
Yeah, all the children were born in Minnesota, or in Iowa actually, and then the family moved to Minnesota.
But about halfway through her diary, she starts writing in Norwegian. She's been playing with her cousins all this time, and so she's been picking up.
Oh my God.
Yes,
I really appreciate the first-hand voice. They're writing in the present. I'm blessed to have a memoir of my mother's when she wrote when she was 77, and it's all in the past, and that's still also good. But to have the live voices, that's really exciting.
Right.
Really unedited, fresh.
Yeah, I think Inga comes across as such a just lively young girl, and yeah.
The 15-year-old voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Susan, is that an authentic dress that you're wearing?
No, this is it's probably, I hope it's somewhat authentic, but you can rent it at the costume store here.
In your size.
What?
more sides.
Yeah, well, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And, let's see, one of the pieces, this little piece was rented at the costume store. And through a Scandinavian connection at the Opera House, I was able to get 3 of the pieces of luggage to borrow them from the props department of the Opera House. Don't tell anybody, I don't think they like to do that.
Dan?
So he left right during the farming season, so took the whole family right for June, July. So who was handling the farm, do you know?
I don't know, he was a farmer, I don't know how he managed that.
Okay.
Yeah, because it would have, you're right,
Right.
good question, yeah.
He had become very prosperous, you know, he built that house, which was in the family until just a few years ago, we sold it. And he started an insurance business, and he was a very prominent citizen, you know, so.
What happened to Inga later in her life?
Inga married Nels Dovry. They had 5 children, and Nels was long dead. You know Nels. I met Inga when she was quite elderly before she died. But one of her sons, Paul Dovry, is quite an illustrious person. He was president of Concordia College in Minnesota for 25 years and retired. And then the new president, I think, had a heart attack. And the board called Paul back to be an interim president, which lasted several more years. So he's quite an illustrious person, and all 5 of those children really accomplished a lot in their lives.
So one thing that really caught me was toward the end there, your grandfather was talking about how touched he was by how enthusiastic the relatives were to see them, and how much fun they had together, and there was this sort of sadness that, you know, he couldn't stay, you know, but you have to make a life in the world, you know, there wasn't enough land for me to own a farm, obviously, was what was going on. And I took my parents back to Norway for my father to meet the relatives, and it was the same, you know, the relatives were just so delighted to see him especially, you know, but all of us, and you know, I think my dad was really touched by that too. I don't think he expected that at all. So it's really special, you know, when you can go back.
Well, the first time I went back to Rostow, I thought, he left this to go to Minnesota? But on the other hand, my dad, who was a farmer, he looked up at those mountains and he thought, I don't know how you grow much up there. You know?
Well, one thing interesting about Anna, the wife, she was one of 14 children, all born in that little cottage you see a picture of. Maybe one of them was born in the porch. Anyway, she left, and several of her siblings did leave. But once she was gone, and then another baby girl was born, they named her Anna because they thought they would never see the original first Anna again. And do we have that picture in the program? Is that in the program of their wedding?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So the bride in that picture is the second Anna, and she's the one that you know, right, Bill? Anna, the second Anna, you met her in Southern California.
She married by a great uncle.
Yeah, yeah. Very incestuous.
You know, that brings, just a quickie, that brings to mind The Immigrants, and we watched that film a couple of years ago. And remember the woman, I mean, she just loved her husband, and she kept having these babies, and her doctor said, you know, you're not gonna make it if you keep having babies like this. So, you know, they tried sleeping apart in different beds, and that didn't work, you know, and she did ultimately, you know, die from childbirth. Yeah, no birth control.
I have a question that's somewhat tangential, and if you don't know the answer, you know, yes or no will be adequate. The Olympic here looks a great deal like the Titanic.
Yeah.
The Titanic was built in the Belfast shipyards in North Ireland. I wonder if this is where the ship came from also.
I don't know if it was built there or not. I know that, well, of course, the Titanic sank, but the Olympic.
It just occurred to me you were on that your relatives were on the right ship.
Yeah. Because they were sister ships.
suspect it
similar,
was.
yeah. And the Olympic did go out of service during the war, but I think they actually, it was a troop ship, used it to carry troops. And then after the war, then they put it back into service again, and eventually it was in the 1930s somewhere, it was sold for scrap, and they just cut it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, would you like to
All right, to finish the story, Bob and I are both fortunate to have gotten these books, which are basically an academic study of the, in a family tree study of the two islands off Stavanger. One island where his family came from, Anna and Inga, and my uncle's wife, my uncle Olaus, grew up on these two islands, less than 2 miles apart from each other, as children. They met, 50 years later in California and married. These were second marriages for both of them after they both emigrated to the U.S.
Okay, any other final comments? All right, so we've got a little video, I took a little video.
Thank you.
So we'll
A
share-
lot of videos.
Share those, and